Hello, and welcome to my podcast where I discuss the origins of all sorts of things. I'm your host, Danny Payne, and this is On the Origin of Everything. Today I'm talking about Tupperware. What is a Tupper? And what were we storing food in before we had plastic containers? I'm pretty excited about this topic because as the host of a podcast about the origins of everyday things, Tupperware is something most of us use regularly and probably never thought twice about where it came from. So, let's get started. In order to talk about Tupperware, we first have to talk about plastics. It's hard to imagine a world without plastics now. But for most of our history, we made do with natural materials like wood, stone, ceramics, glass, and metals. We eventually figured out how to reshape natural polymers like rubber from plants and shellac from bugs, but those aren't plastics. Before working on this topic, I would have guessed that the first man-made plastic was created around the mid-1900s, but I was about 100 years off. The first man-made plastic was invented by an English bloke named Alexander Parkes in 1862. He called it Parksine, after himself, a semi-synthetic thermoplastic based on cellulose nitrate, which could be engineered to be hard or soft, flexible, but strong. Just 8 years later, John Wesley Hyatt in Albany, New York, patented celluloid, another semi-synthetic plastic based on cellulose nitrate. He had been working on a substitute for ivory billiards when he discovered and patented celluloid, and immediately started to make denture plates out of it. Parksine and celluloid laid the foundation for the first ever fully synthetic plastic, invented by Leo Baekeland in 1907. He called it Bakelite, after himself. Made of phenol and formaldehyde, Bakelite revolutionized manufacturing with its moldability, durability, non-conductive, heat-resistant, and chemically stable properties, ideal for just about any application, like the plastics we know today. This was the pivotal moment in which humanity entered the age of plastics in 1907. Bakelite began to be used to make telephones, kitchenware, radios, toys, and a bunch of other stuff through the 1910s and 20s. That feels so early, right? Well, that's because World War II was the accelerant that transformed plastics from being used in relatively niche markets to a global necessity. War has a way of propelling existing cutting-edge technology into widespread use. It's sort of a paradox. While war is destructive, it also drives innovation. This was the case with plastics during World War II. Due to metal shortages, military forces adopted plastics aggressively, using plastic components on aircrafts, vehicles, helmets, parachutes, electrical wiring, radar insulation, and more. It was the wartime scaling of plastics that really ramped up the infrastructure for their mass production. In my opening, I posed the question, what is a Tupper? Well, just like Parksine was named after Alexander Parkes, and Bakelite was named after Leo Baekeland, Tupperware was named after its inventor, Earl Tupper. Earl Tupper was born in 1907 in New Hampshire and grew up farming with his family in central Massachusetts. They struggled financially as his dad was good at tinkering and inventing gadgets, but was not so good at farming. Earl's upbringing was surrounded by scarcity, improvisation, and scrappiness. At age 10, he sold his family's produce door to door, and, like his dad, he was drawn to inventing things too, primarily tools to improve efficiency on the farm. I mention all of this because it shaped him into the person who would eventually invent something like Tupperware. After high school, Earl Tupper started his own business as a tree surgeon, which was a term for arboriculture, taking care of trees by pruning, bracing, treating insect infestations, that sort of stuff. But then, the Great Depression hit, and it killed his business, forcing him to go find another way to make a living. He landed a job at a plastics factory. There, he learned about molding and the science and manufacturing processes of making plastics. Now, Earl Tupper wasn't the type of guy to work a factory job the rest of his life. Instead, he founded the Tupperware Plastics Company in 1938. It started out as just a small molding operation, but he got into the plastics game at the right time. The United States entered World War II in 1939, right? Well, there is no evidence that Tupper ever landed any government contracts during the war, but that doesn't matter. He must have gotten along fine because his company was still around when the war ended. And that's when significant things happened, after the war. There was a sudden surplus of plastics that had been manufactured and allocated for the war, but then the war ended. So plastic-producing companies looked to sell off their surplus to other manufacturers, inventors, whoever. Earl Tupper was one of those buyers. He ended up with some high-quality polyethylene from DuPont, or DuPont, a chemicals and materials research firm who had been providing the military with polyethylene products. Earl Tupper managed to refine this raw material further, taking it from a previously smelly, waxy industrial product to an odorless, smooth consumer product, and released the revolutionary Wonder Bowl in 1946. The patent he filed called it open mouth container and non-snap type of closure therefore. Hilarious. What's so special about a plastic bowl, you might be thinking? Well, it wasn't just a plastic bowl. It came with an airtight lid, inspired by the design of paint can lids. Before Earl Tupper's introduction of the Wonder Bowl, people had been storing food in metal containers, glassware, or wax paper that weren't great at keeping food fresh. Metal containers often gave food a metallic taste. Glassware was heavy and could break, and paper wasn't moisture-proof and was only good for short-term storage. Nothing was airtight besides mason jars, but those were for long-term food preservation, not practical for daily use. The airtight feature of the Wonder Bowl really was revolutionary. But there was a problem. If you've ever watched Shark Tank, you know that if a product hinges too much on demonstration, the sharks are reluctant to invest. Earl Tupper's Wonder Bowl was awesome, but it was lost on the consumer. How can a lid be confusing to anyone? Well, the application of the lid required a certain technique that was new to the world. You would place the lid flat on the bowl, then push down on the center of the flexible lid, allowing air to escape the bowl, creating a soft burping sound. The lid would then seal the bowl with less air in it. This burping seal was the genius of the Wonder Bowl. But without any demonstration, people were left to conclude that the lid was faulty, defective, or flimsy at best. The public also needed to be educated on the value of airtight food storage. For these reasons, the Wonder Bowl did not sell well in stores, even though it was only 39 cents, about $5 today. Earl Tupper had a brain for inventing things, not so much for marketing things. This seems to be a common problem for inventors. He needed help. He needed someone who understood people as well as he understood plastics, and that someone was Brownie Wise. Brownie Wise was working for Stanley Home Products, a company that sold household items through home demonstrations. This business model grew out of the door-to-door selling technique, which had been around for a long time. The shift from that to in-home demonstrations was the idea of a man named Norman Squires who had been selling aluminum cookware. He discovered that women were likely to buy more products in a social setting, so he shifted to the hostess party home demonstration model in the 30s, the first to ever do it. Norman Squires would go on to work at Stanley Home Products, and its founder, Frank Stanley Beveridge, adopted Norman Squires' in-home demonstration practices. So, back to Brownie Wise. She was a pro at these hostess home parties. She had a knack for making women feel seen, building a community around products, recruiting other women to do as she did, making her a top performer in the Stanley Home Products Company. One day, Brownie came upon the Wonder Bowl on a store shelf and immediately saw its value. She bought some to try out and experienced the benefits for herself. She contacted Tupperware Plastics Company to become an authorized dealer of Tupperware products, giving her access to an inventory of Wonder Bowls at wholesale prices. Because she was able to demonstrate them at her parties, She sold a ton of them, outselling everything else. She essentially built a small distribution network out of her basement, packing orders herself, shipping them to other women she recruited to sell them, and sending sales reports back to Tupperware, catching Earl Tupper's attention. It's important to note that Brownie wasn't only sending reports back to the Tupperware Plastics Company, she was also sending letters and suggestions to Earl Tupper directly. She even called him to inform him of a party she had hosted, which resulted in a tremendous number of sales. She believed in the Tupperware product so much that she was willing to give Tupper pointers on how to best sell his bowls. So it's true that she got Tupper's attention, but it took a lot of effort on her part. After seeing her sales reports and hearing her pitch, Tupper hired her on as a distributor at first, but she would eventually be promoted to Vice President of Tupperware Home Parties. Brownie's proposed business model of selling through home parties was so successful that Tupper pulled the Wonder Bowl from retail stores altogether and reorganized the company around the direct sales model of the home party. They were widely known as Tupperware parties. My father-in-law told me that everyone was attending these things. Why were they so influential, though? Who could possibly care that much about some plastic bowls to the point that it became a socio-cultural phenomenon? Well, aside from the effective sales pitch in the proper social setting, Tupperware had something else going for it: timing. After the war, America experienced an economic boom, along with the rise of the suburbs, the perfect environment for Tupperware parties. They were more than just a sales event. They were social gatherings for housewives. Word-of-mouth sales were a major contributor to Tupperware's success. Plastics were also associated with modernity, the way of the future. And Tupper and Brownie capitalized on this public perception by dressing up all of their presentations to be high class, conveying to the prospective buyer that plastic containers were a sign of wealth and status. They went hand in hand with their updated and upgraded appliances. In the 50s, everything looked space age, from toasters to fridges, and colorful, money-saving, food-preserving containers made of a new technologically advanced material fit nicely within that aesthetic. By buying Tupperware, you were keeping up with the Joneses. You had the house in the suburbs, the new time-saving appliances in your home, and now you had Tupperware in your kitchen as a sort of cherry on top. Tupperware parties gave housewives something more substantial than just an opportunity to mingle with other housewives in their neighborhoods. They also provided a sense of empowerment in a man's world. Becoming a distributor of Tupperware was a gender-appropriate way for a woman to earn income. It provided them independence, autonomy, and a way to contribute financially within their households. Instead of working in roles that were acceptable for women, like a secretary, librarian, or flight attendant, they could be as awesome as Brownie Wise, buying wholesale and selling retail, earning commissions from their own sales and from the sales of women they recruited to be distributors. Tupperware's sales structure resembles what we know today as multi-level marketing, without the pitfalls. I don't want to get into MLMs in this episode because it would completely derail the topic, but it suffices to say that Tupperware was a proto-MLM, an early version of it, containing some of the same elements of modern MLMs. Speaking of, Mary Kay actually came out of this direct sales world. She was a distributor for Stanley Home products just like Brownie Wise was. How cool is that? Tupperware had everything going for it. It hit the market at the right time in American history. Brownie Wise became one of the highest-ranking women in American business. She was the first woman to appear on the cover of Business Week magazine. Her story is an inspiring one, to be sure. I'm gonna take a quick break right here, and when I come back, I'll continue her story with how she got fired. Don't go anywhere. This podcast is listener-supported, and we'd love to keep it that way. Pause the show right now and click the link in the show notes to donate. I'll be right here when you get back. You can also help us grow the show with a 5-star rating and review, or by following or sharing the show. Let's build a community of people that are curious and always learning. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening. Now, back to the show. Brownie Wise had been instrumental in making Tupperware a household name by implementing and perfecting the in-home demonstration parties, building a national network of distributors. But one day, in January of 1958, she came into work to find that her office door was locked. She was called into a meeting and was told that she was being terminated. It was sudden, without warning. But why? Earl Tupper and Brownie Wise had been butting heads over company finances. Tupper felt that her department was overspending on sales events and commission payouts. As he tried to rein her in, she resisted, and this disagreement contributed to her termination. But wait, there's more. Tupper was also threatened by Brownie's growing public fame. She had become the face of Tupperware, appearing as the sole person responsible for Tupperware's success. Earl Tupper resented that she was taking all the credit for what his company had achieved. There was yet a third reason she was let go, and I think this one carries the most weight. Tupper had been planning to sell his company and felt that Brownie's presence, fame, and influence over the sales force would complicate the sale, especially since he and Brownie didn't see eye to eye on spending. So, he ended her employment abruptly, without even a severance package, and escorted her out the door. Brownie sued Tupper for wrongful termination, arguing a breach of contract, damages for loss of income, and damages for harm to reputation. The case never went to court, though. It was settled out of court, and the settlement? Only $30,000. No royalties, no stocks, no ongoing compensation for all she had done for Tupperware. After all, she wasn't a shareholder and was never an equal partner to Tupper, so $30,000 is all she got. A few months later, Earl Tupper sold Tupperware to Rexall Drug Company for $16 million, about $170 million in today's money. He then divorced his wife, renounced his U.S. citizenship, and moved to Costa Rica as a way to reduce the amount of taxes he would have to pay. Costa Rica isn't a bad place to retire either. Even nicer with $16 million in your pocket. Whether Earl Tupper was a good guy or a bad guy for how he ended things with Brownie Wise, his wife, and the IRS is up for debate. To me, it seems clear that he cared less about Brownie than she cared about his invention. Tupper seems to me like a typical businessman, loyal to his bottom line and a lucrative exit strategy that he didn't want to mess up. And while I'm weighing in, I think he could have done a lot better than 30 G's, which he only awarded Brownie after she tried to take him to court. Letting her go like that was less than ethical, in my opinion. I'd love to conclude by saying that Brownie Wise went on to bigger and better things as a big-shot executive for another corporation, but there's very little information about her after her days with Tupperware. She never again held a comparable executive position. In 1957, the year before she was fired, she published an autobiography titled Best Wishes, Brownie Wise, How to Put Your Wishes to Work, in which she not only recounts her rise to success, but encourages women to dream big. After her termination, the Tupperware staff buried thousands of remaining copies of her book as part of their efforts to erase her from corporate history. She died in 1992 at age 79 in Kissimmee, Florida, the same place where Tupperware's headquarters was located. This wouldn't be the first time a business partnership ended poorly, of course, but the story of Earl Tupper and Brownie Wise is one worth telling. It's a story of opposites that changed history. Tupper was the perfectionist, the inventive engineer who created a product that solved a real problem. He understood plastics and manufacturing, but he lacked what Brownie brought to the table. While Tupper's genius was technical, Brownie's was social and psychological. She was a master storyteller, presenter, and organizer who understood people, their aspirations, and the power of community. These two very different people collided at the perfect time to establish Tupperware as one of the most iconic products of the 20th century. And that's the origin story of Tupperware. Next time you put some leftover lasagna or meatloaf in an airtight container, I hope you'll appreciate the ability to keep food fresh longer, thanks to Earl Tupper and Brownie Wise. And one last thing before I go. Just like we call all tissues Kleenexes and all adhesive bandages Band-Aids, Tupperware has become the generic term for all food storage containers. This is a common thing that happens to trademark name brands. There's even a name for it. It's called genericization. Now you know. So that's it for today. Who would have thought that I could talk about Tupperware for 20 minutes, or however long this ends up being? I thought it was a surprisingly interesting story. Hope you did too. Tune in a couple of weeks for another super random topic. Until next time, so long. Research, music, and production was all done by Desiree Wilson. This podcast is owned and operated by Jez and myself under the On the Origin of Everything LLC in the United States. All rights reserved. We can be reached via email at info@ontheoriginpod.com.